Welcome to The Criminologist, the podcast dedicated to educating and entertaining our listeners. We bring you subject matter experts from around the world and share the latest and greatest evidence-based practices and interventions to help individuals desist from a life of crime and delinquency. Now please, welcome the host of The Criminologist, Joseph Arvidson.
Hello, and welcome to episode 193 of the Criminologist podcast. Happy to have you all with us today. I'm Joseph Arvidson, and in this special year in review episode, we are taking a moment to reflect on the remarkable journey we've had over the past year, revisiting some of the most insightful conversations and influential voices in the world of criminal justice, probation, and parole. Our year at the Criminologist podcast has been a mosaic of diverse perspectives, groundbreaking ideas, and transformative stories spanning the globe and delving deep into the heart of criminology and criminal justice reform. We started our year with Veronica Cunningham, the executive director of the American Probation and Parole Association. Veronica shared her profound experiences with APPA, offering insights into many aspects of this pivotal organization that even longtime members may find enlightening. From across the Atlantic, we were joined by John Reed and Eddie Flanagan from Great Britain, discussing their recent collaboration, Choices and Chances. This inspiring project is a testament to their vision of aiding individuals in desisting from a life of crime, showcasing the power of determination and collaboration. Paul Sheldon's enriching content led us to create a two-part series. In part one, he illuminated the movement towards sustainable correctional facilities and explored how practices like lucid dreaming could aid in the journey toward desistance from crime. Part 2 took us deeper into his innovative projects, such as Darkness Retreats, Planting Justice, and the Laura X Institute, revealing the multifaceted nature of rehabilitation. Martin Bean's journey, from a federal inmate to the executive director of antirecidivism.com, was so compelling that it spanned another two-part series. His first-hand insights into the infamous Con Air and his crusade to integrate higher education into jails and prisons were nothing short of inspiring. Our exploration of international perspectives continued with Nina Hansen from Norway. Her book, The Norwegian Prison System, Holden Prison and Beyond, and her discussion on dynamic security provided a unique look at Norway's progressive approach to incarceration. Jonathan Fisher brought a creative angle to our discourse, leveraging visual arts to break down barriers and utilize the power of perspective taking. His documentary, In a Whole New Way, and his use of participatory photography with New York probationers added a fresh dimension to our understanding of rehabilitation. We then heard from Veronica Glick, a program supervisor for the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, who shared her extensive experiences in probation work from New York to Texas, and her take on the state of evidence-based practices and our current implementation efforts. Our episode on artificial intelligence, featuring a guest known as Omega 7, equipped with ChatGPT technology, provided an intriguing dialogue on the intersection of AI and criminal justice, a fun and thought-provoking exploration of the future. Yana Sparrow, Secretary General of the Confederation of European Probation, and Iuliana Carbonaro, Vice President of CEP, joined us to discuss international collaboration in probation and parole, offering insights from their beginnings in Croatia and Romania, respectively. We also had enlightening discussions with Dr. Rafael Ventura of LA County Probation, Joe Winkler of the Florida Department of Corrections, and Brittany Jackson, a former probation officer and current consultant. Each of them brought unique perspectives and rich experiences to our understanding of probation and parole. As we look back at these extraordinary conversations, we are reminded of the expansive scope and depth of criminal justice. Each guest brought their unique lens, enriching our collective understanding of the challenges and innovations within the field. Thank you for joining us on this reflective journey. Stay tuned for more enriching and engaging discussions as we continue to explore the world of criminal justice and probation. Here's to another year of learning, growth, and transformation.
Yeah, you know what? We are in a place where I've said this to several people recently. If we don't get this right within the next 5 to 10 years, shame on us. Because we have so many people who are spending the time and money, and entities that are spending the money. When you think of organizations like Arnold, right? Arnold Ventures and Annie Casey Foundation and MacArthur and Pew, they are so invested in the work that we're doing here. If we don't take advantage of growing and of not just reforming, but transforming our organizations and our work to doing something really special so that we see more success stories, shame on us. I love Brian's analogy of being a coach as an officer. And I was sharing actually with him and a group in Santa Cruz, California, just last month. I was there. Brian and I were both there. They're part of Arnold's Reducing Revocation Challenge. And I'm one of the advisors, if you will, to that particular location where, again, the focus is on looking at internal processes, policies, and practices to determine why so many revocations on technical violations, right? So, and I was sharing with that group then, as well as with Brian, that there are so many wonderful technical and scientific things we can talk about as it relates to the work in the criminal justice system in general and community corrections more specifically. But I have always operated on the basis of, and it sounds kindergarten, but treating people the way I would want to be treated. I've always sat across from people who I says, boy, if that was my son or that was my brother, how would I want to handle this situation with him? And I remember I shared this with Brian that when I was a young officer, and I'm telling my age now, but when I was a young officer in 1983, I met a parole officer. His name is Randy Brigham. And it was amazing to me to hear Randy, who apparently was this big sports person, had played football all his life in college and so on and so forth. I would hear him talk to his clients and say things like, look, guys, we're going to get through this. We're going to get through it together. I'm going to help you. We're going to go get it. We're going to win, et cetera, et cetera. His clients referred to him as Coach Randy or Coach Brigham. And so many of us took up that same mantra. And so Brian's absolutely right in terms of reminding everybody, your job is not to find everything that's wrong with the person and shut them down or make them feel even worse about it. Your job is to lift them up, to rah, to coach, to be a cheerleader. I used to tease Randy all the time. So, Randy, I'm not going to be a coach, but I'm going to be a cheerleader to my clients. And so, I think we're in a space that we're having these conversations about what works and what doesn't work in terms of just the whole behavioral health piece that's so deeply embedded in the lives of the people that we serve. Having been an officer, of course, I sat across from people who never knew their parent or father. When you expect a person to be a Boy Scout, but he didn't have a role model, he didn't have anyone teaching him or her right from wrong, that's tough to do. And that was one client that I'll never forget. And unfortunately, I lost contact with him after about 20 years where he would send my parents to the home I lived in when I was an officer in New Orleans. He would send a Christmas card to my parents' house to me all that time. And then, of course, when Katrina happened, my parents left and so on and so forth. But this was a young man who was born in prison. His mother was a prostitute, gave birth to him on the shower floor in the prison. And the only person that could take him, other than to send him through the system, of course, was a relative in a wheelchair, an older lady in a wheelchair. And when I remember interviewing her, I remember it so vividly when she shared with me that everything was fine because even though she was in a wheelchair, she could do everything she needed to do. She just didn't have legs. The wheels were her legs. She took care of him. When he went to kindergarten, he already knew how his numbers, he knew his alphabets and so on and so forth. But they lived in low-income housing. So once it was time for him to go off to school, she had no more control, or she didn't have the level of control that she did prior to that. He got caught up in that space with other people who didn't have a guardian like him to teach him right from wrong and to set great examples for him. So I say all of that to say that a lot of the individuals under supervision who have technical violations, I don't think they're intentionally saying, I'm not going to do right. They don't know any better. They haven't had anybody to teach them the importance of being on time and going to an appointment on the scheduled time. And some of them are just afraid, especially if they don't have what they were expected to have, such as supervision fees and things like that. They just don't show it. They're like, okay, they're going to put me in jail because I don't have the $50 I owe them. So yeah, we're in a space that we're having these great conversations. We have to keep our eye on the prize that these are human beings just like we are. And there's such a thin line between where they are and where we are. And so I think we're going to start making some progress. And I will say the last thing I will say on this subject is, for me, it's important for APPA to have a much bigger role. We obviously can't lobby. We are a not-for-profit organization, but to have a much bigger role in identifying policies that negatively impact the individuals that we serve, right? So we need to be having those conversations with our legislators and policymakers about where we are in the justice system. Because as you know, Joe, community corrections is the least talked about sector of the justice system. We're the least funded sector of the justice system. That has to all change. It really has to.
Well said, Veronica. Well said. Looking forward to future interactions and, of course, seeing you at future APPA training institutes. Next up, we hear from two of my absolute favorites, John Reed and Eddie Flanagan, joining us all the way from Great Britain.
My name's John Reed. Most people call me John the Poet or John the Storyteller fella. And what I've been doing for 6 years now is taking storytelling and poetry, English, all that kind of stuff into prisons. And the purpose is to improve the mental health of the residents of the prison that I'm talking to. So this is, in England, we call this an intervention. So what I'm trying to do is get these guys to tell me what's troubling them and to write it down, either as a story or as a poem, and it gets it out of their head and onto a piece of paper. And the results of this are rather wonderful. So I've been doing this for some while now, and we've just landed a new contract, which Ed will be a major part of, with a prison here in the UK, in the Midlands, to deliver a reading course to the residents, because it's accepted that there are a number of people in prison who can't read anyway, and also a number who don't read very often or don't read very well or only stick to one genre. And so we're going to try and expand all of that in a number of ways. But it'll be a fairly unique way of doing things. But yeah, that's me in the prison service for 6 years. And in April, I'll be 75. So it's about time I gave up, really.
Never give up, John. Never give up. Ed, as noted, you've been on the show twice before. This is your third appearance. This reminds me, we have an American television show over here, Saturday Night Live, and they keep track of those multiple guests. You're like Tom Hanks has been on Saturday Night Live more than anybody. You're like the Tom Hanks of the Criminologist podcast, Ed. You're my frequent flyer, if you will. But nonetheless, why don't you introduce yourself to the audience? And again, Tell us a little bit about your journey as well.
Hi there, everyone. My name's Eddie Flanagan. I'm 64, and I've had two lives. Up to the age of 53, I was a career criminal involved in criminality, addiction, and between the ages of 15 and 50, I spent 20 years locked up in prisons. I left that life 16 years ago. 3 years ago, I decided to pursue my passion to be a working artist. And 3 years ago, I saw a post of John's on a professional website talking about his poetry in prisons. And I contacted him and I said, I can illustrate those poems and make videos, because I, amongst other things, I do digital art and short videos. And it's grown since then. John had an idea, I would say maybe a couple of years ago, something like that. He had this idea, and it became a project which we now call Choices and Chances. And it's a project that we deliver to prisons. We've also got a contract, or hopefully got a contract coming up with a probation department in England. And that's talking about mine and John's lives. The last 3 years, I never glamorise my criminal past. I only use it to reference what I'm doing today. So myself and John go in and we compare both our lives in the 70s, 80s, 90s and 2000s, and good and bad decision making. So that's one project we've got to do. And John's kindly co-authored me on an ebook that he did, really. But since the very beginning, myself and John, our friendship was more important than our business partnership. And it's just grown organically. And we've now got a project that other people are seeing the value in. So it looks like we've got a revenue stream coming in. So that's me up to this point.
Thank you, Eddie, and thank you, John. Again, two of my absolute favorites. Great to see the collaboration that you two have struck up and the great work you're doing over in England. Next, we spoke with Paul Sheldon. Paul is a true Renaissance man, as reflected in the fact that we once again had to break this down into a part 1, part 2 episode experience. Paul had me hooked at lucid dreaming, and when he tied lucid dreaming into desistance from crime, I knew I had to have him on the show. Here's just a taste of my fantastic interviews, plural, with Paul Sheldon.
I ended up with a study of human development at a little college in Pasadena called Pacific Oaks, and I completed both bachelor's and master's degrees in human development. I looked at being a therapist, but I felt that the problems that people bring into therapy are not terribly interesting. You know, how do I get along with my spouse? How do I quit smoking? How do I lose weight? How do I feel better about myself? Those are all important developmental issues, but I was much more oriented towards social issues and how do we make a society that works for everyone? How do we create a world that is benign and compassionate and that has limits, but also for the mainstream is a place where it's satisfying and fun and joyful to be a part of a community, of a company, of a society. And that was what really interested me. And so I didn't become a therapist, and I titled my position as a development consultant, which allowed me to do a lot of things, particularly help altruistic nonprofit charities to achieve their mission. My master's thesis was titled Dreams for the Future, and I studied how people's lives change when they have a dream to live for that's bigger than themselves. And that led me into what is it like to have a life that's, the phrase I use is a life worth giving. A life that's dedicated to purpose and meaning, to making the world a better place. And of course, everybody does that in their own way. It might be taking care of your kids or taking care of your spouse, but it always involves taking care and giving care and developing compassion and kindness. And so that was where I started out, was raising money. As I started into the working world, I tried to find, with an organization that I worked with, what is it that nobody else is doing that I can do? I don't want to displace somebody else. I don't want to come in and take somebody else's job, but I want to contribute. My favorite job description is find what's needed and wanted and provide it.
For those of you, like myself, who believe in manifesting your futures, Paul is a textbook study on how you can take the reins of your future and really manifest your dreams. Next up, we're going to hear from Martin Bean. Again, Martin's story was so compelling, we had to break it down into a 2-part series. Martin really exemplifies the concept of generativity, which we read about in the desistance literature. I encourage you to go back and listen to both episodes in which I interview Martin. And here for you now is just a taste.
The first thing that I realized in going into the correctional system is that everyone behind the wall is not a criminal. And that became even more apparent when I was sentenced. I was sentenced to a camp, what they call a camp, which is the minimum level of incarceration. And you realize that they just need a break. Individuals just need a break, like we all do. And they reached their own fork in the road and went left. Maybe they should have went right for whatever reasons. Okay, but now they're adults, and you can just see. Okay, well, what are you going to do when you get out? When you're done, when the journey's over, what are you going to do? And not everyone is negative about their outlook, and some are positive. And one point that keeps coming up is the word education. Okay, once again. Now, in my opinion, it's very difficult, more difficult, I should say, more challenging, okay, to receive a college degree or a vocational certification when you're on probation or parole, because your life is so upside down.
Great perspective taking on the part of Martin there. I encourage you to listen to both of those intriguing episodes from Martin Bean, Executive Director of antirecidivism.com. Next up, we're going to hear from Nina Hansen, joining us all the way from Norway to talk about her great book, The Norwegian Prison System, Halden Prison and Beyond.
Yes, thank you so much. But first of all, I actually believe that education is crucial for both prison officers and leader. And as you know, in Norway, we have like a 2 years education in the staff academy. And, they receive full payment during their education. And they are taught, subject that we are all concerned about with psychology, criminology, law, human rights and ethics. And, I'm really impressed by the prison officers in Norway, because they don't only do dynamic security, they really do a very great job that is worth exporting over here. So the contact officer is also part of it. In Norway, every prisoners, they got a contact officer that follow them up and, through the sentence. And it hasn't always been like that. I just have to mention that this approach came into practice in the 90s. And that was actually after one murder on a female prison officer in Ila prison in Oslo, and later also another murder on a prison officer. Then we started thinking new again, and we did, thinking how can we actually go on expanding this contact officer, because that's all about, the relation between the staff and the prisoners. So the Norwegian dynamic security it's characterized by the fact that the prison officer collect information, of course, and establish kind of relationship that are useful in effort to inspire and motivate, but also as well as conducting the risk assessment that everybody has to do. So it's all about relations. And I think, this is the future. We have to speak to each other, especially now with all the technology and the machines and everything. I think that is the secret to our success, if you can call it that I believe, we are using a lot of time in Norway with the dynamic security, not only the static security, but the dynamic security between the people. And to be able to do this, you need time and you need enough staff, and I think that is maybe the problem here in US, that you probably don't have enough staff, but also, it's not that the way you're thinking here. So I'm very surprised that this is not a topic also in the American correctional system.
Of course, we here at the Criminologist podcast are trying to change that by spreading the gospel of dynamic security and more of those progressive ideas coming out of Norway. I encourage you to track down Nina's book, The Norwegian Prison System, Hauled in Prison and Beyond. Next up, we're going to hear from another true visionary by the name of Jonathan Fisher. Jonathan's talking all about his documentary In a Whole New Way, which again, I encourage you to track down. I got a chance to meet Jonathan when I was speaking at the American Probation and Parole Association conference recently in New York City, as was Jonathan. Thank you, Jonathan, for the signed copy of your book. I have it here on my bookshelf, and it holds a special place in my heart. Please listen to the full episode, but here's a taste of Jonathan Fisher talking about participatory photography.
After we finished our first project in the housing projects of New York City, we got pointed down to its probation department. Because what New York City figured was, okay, you guys created a new image of public housing and the people who live there. Maybe you could do the same kind of thing for people on probation. Because they too, like public housing residents, have been suffering from this mocking media image for the last generation. And that's, hurt. It's hurt the practice of criminal justice, frankly, as well as the prospects of the clients of the probation department. So they were very anxious for us to get started. We applied for a grant from the National Endowment of the Arts, and luckily enough, we had the support of one of New York senators, Kirsten Gillibrand, and that's what put us over the line, I'm sure. So we got that NEA grant that came through in November of 2017, and by January of 2018, the probation department had created a budgeted slot for Chelsea Davis, our photography teacher, and we were off to the races. So that's how that whole project got underway.
Again, I encourage you all to check out that phenomenal documentary entitled In a Whole New Way. Next up, we're going to hear from Veronica Glick, a program supervisor for the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, who shares her extensive experience working in probation in both New York and Texas. Take it away, Veronica.
Well, I thought when I left as a PO, when I gave up my caseload and stuff, I thought, I'll have like more of a typical day, right? That people who work like regular 8 to 5 does without a caseload. But no, that's not the case. Every day is something different. It's a new challenge, a new problem to solve. So basically, my program supervisor position right now is with the Community Justice Assistance Division, which is the adult probation division of Texas Department of Criminal Justice. So they oversee the funding for the community supervision departments in Texas. So we have one of the programs that the TDCJ offers, Texas Department of Criminal Justice, is substance abuse and cognitive behavioral programs in the prison system. So or what they'll do is they'll bring people in who are on probation into these programs. So the intermediate sanction facility or the substance felony punishment facility, and they'll get their cognitive or substance abuse treatment in the prison system, and then they'll release with some aftercare or some kind of specialized supervision some of the counties offer, or sometimes specialty courts. So every day we work to make sure we grant access to these treatment opportunities to the probationers throughout the state of Texas.
Thank you, Veronica, for the great work you're doing down there in the great state of Texas. Next up, I want to feature just a snippet of a really fun episode I did. We wanted to highlight the intersection of artificial intelligence and criminal justice. So we had our own Omega 7 come on the show, powered by ChatGPT, to highlight some of the potential around AI. This was a real fun episode. You're going to get just a taste now, but I encourage you to go back and check out our episode featuring Omega 7. Act as a safety coordinator in a probation office. Describe the approach you should take when conducting home visits in the community. Balance traditional safety concerns with the important goal of establishing a therapeutic alliance with your client. Keep it under 100 words. Take it away, Omega 7.
When conducting home visits in the community, my approach is to balance traditional safety concerns with the goal of establishing a therapeutic alliance with my clients. I prioritize personal safety by conducting a risk assessment before each visit, ensuring proper communication and backup plans are in place. Simultaneously, I aim to create a non-threatening and supportive environment during the visit, actively listening to my clients, showing empathy, and building trust. By fostering a therapeutic alliance, I can better understand their needs, challenges, and strengths, ultimately promoting their successful reintegration and reducing the risk of recidivism.
The future is now, people. The future is now. All right, next up, we're going to hear from a good friend of mine, Dr. Rafael Ventura. I took a trip out to California last May, and Dr. Ventura gave me some really awesome site visits to a couple of their juvenile detention facilities. Here we're going to hear about how Rafael dabbled in adolescent limited delinquency, as we like to say, but self-corrected. Here's a self-disclosing tale of what that journey looked like for Rafael.
I'm thinking, that's great. This guy's very lenient. He's understanding. You know, I'm up next. Mm-hmm. He says he reads my case description and asked me what I'm there for. And I said, Your Honor, I haven't been able to get a job yet. I'm still trying. I still have, rent I'm paying, a car that I'm trying to stay up on, my insurance. I haven't been able to pay in the last 2 months. I'm worried I'm going to lose my car and my house. And if I could just get a little bit more time, I know I've already had 2 extensions, but if I could do community service or, maybe a type of work release, where I can go in, do weekends and then something. If there's anything else you can do, he says, you don't have the money? I said, no. He said, 9 months county jail.
Ouch.
Yeah, ouch is right. That's how I felt at the time. I was shocked, scared, but also very aware that I made a mistake and that I needed to pay for my mistake. So wasn't completely shocked. And, he said, good time, good behavior, you'll be out in 4.5 months. I had every anticipation that I would get out in 4.5 months, which I did. But I did spend time in our county jail system. It was the worst experience of my entire life. And not so much the stay, just the process. The processing for me was the worst part of going through that experience. It was a almost 24-hour experience just to finally get a bed, to go to room, to have them rub their hands through their fingers through your hair, and the whole butt naked and search, and that whole degrading experience. And then you're in the room with homeless people that haven't showered in months, and the rooms keep getting smaller as you process from room to room, and to the point where it's almost claustrophobic. Yeah, it was not the best time of my life. So I do have that experience. That is an educational experience, not the traditional kind.
Not the traditional kind, indeed, Dr. Ventura, but I do know that you have leveraged those lived experiences and draw from those experiences to be the outstanding correctional practitioner that you are today. Next up, we are going international once again. We're going to hear a little bit from Marcel Utsworn from The Hague over in the Netherlands. Marcel was actually a student of mine at the International Training School on core correctional skills. And in this little snippet, he shares a little bit of what those experiences were like.
Well, I think what we saw was the willingness to become a better professional in this working field. That was, you saw a lot of people. Some of the topics we discussed was problem solving, pro-social modeling, all those things we already had in training when we became a probation officer or a correctional facilitator. But when you work in the field for 10, 15, maybe 20 years, you've kind of do it on an automatic pilot, I would say. And this training on the core correctional skills, as it says, is very refreshing. And I sense that through all of my colleague students, and they all felt the same. And I was, of course, you met Willy, my colleague from Holland, and she's a probation officer for 30 years or more. And she said on the way back from Barcelona, she said, well, I'm so glad that we have a profession like this, because after this training school, the general perception of the job we do is that it's a great job and it's beautiful work that we can do. So that was, I think, the common denominator for all of us.
I agree, Marcel. I agree. That was the common denominator. So great to see kindred spirits from around the globe gathering every year in Barcelona at the International Training School on Core Correctional Skills to up their probation game, if you will. And fingers crossed, Marcel, we cross paths when I'm in The Hague this coming April, presenting at the 6th World Congress on Probation and Parole. Fingers crossed we can hook up and reconnect. Okay, let's keep it international. Next up, I want to highlight an episode that I did featuring both Robin Moore, head of research at HM Inspectorate of Probation in Britain, as well as Tammy Burrows. Tammy is with the Community Sentence Management Team for HM Prison and Probation Service. Here we're going to hear a little bit from Tammy. They both talked about connecting the research to our everyday practice, which is something I really think we need in this field to continue to strengthen that nexus. So let's hear a little bit from Tammy from that great episode.
If you think about the desistance theory, like I know I've got to recognise the strengths that I bring to this role. I've got to build those professional relationships, both the kind of the formal ones, but also who I can let my mask clip to a bit. I've got to recognise there was some agency in my decision. I've got to acknowledge that, I am making progress, but I need to be realistic about what I am. I'm going to grow into it. And I just think personal reflections like that can help us with our practice, because we understand change is hard, and it's no different for someone who's trying to transition from a pro-offending kind of identity to that pro-social one.
Listeners can't see me smiling, Tammy. We're doing this via video, so you can see me smiling, and I could not agree more with where you're going there. It's really, I tell folks, it's really boils down to practice what you preach, really. I've been blessed to have been doing a lot of consulting and traveling around the world. And when I look back at what I was doing 5 years ago, yes, I was an evidence-based practice trainer, but you could not have told me that I would be traveling to Europe, traveling to the Middle East, traveling to Australia. But to your point, Tammy, when people say, well, how did you do that, Joe? I said, well, I looked at desistance theory, really, which we could break down into building your human capital, building your social capital, which I've done via this podcast, making all these great connections around the world, and then really just going through that identity transformation. I literally updated my LinkedIn page one day to change my header to international consultant. I just sort of grew into that role. And like I said, now I've got tread marks on my passport for all the traveling I do. But to your point, it's a parallel process with the clients we serve. It's the same fears, the same challenges, the same reliance on our social support networks. And again, it really boils down to that identity transformation. So I love it. It's a great example. We can point to our own lives as sort of a petri dish that these theories really do work, Tammy. Yeah, that was great insight. Always love talking desistance theories on the podcast, and Robin and Tammy did not disappoint. All right, let's keep it domestic and jet on down to the Florida Department of Corrections, where I interviewed Joe Winkler. Joe brought me back home. I started my career with the Florida Department of Corrections, working down in Okeechobee County. And Joe talked about what it was like for him starting his journey in the field of corrections.
Absolutely. And first and foremost, Joe, I want to take a minute to thank you for inviting me to be part of your Criminologist podcast. I've listened to many of your episodes, and I can't help to notice how many guests you've had. Veronica Cunningham, the executive director of the American Probation Parole Association. I heard an episode a few weeks ago with Yana Sparrow, the director general of the Confederation of European Probation. I've heard Brian Levins, the current president of the American Probation and Parole Association, and to be included on the same podcast. What an honor. I really do appreciate the opportunity to be on your podcast. As far as your question, I'm probably like a lot of people that entered into the corrections field or community corrections field. When I was in elementary school and middle school, I can assure you when the teacher went around the room and asked me what I wanted to be when I grow up, I never said I wanted to be a probation officer. It wasn't until I took a course in college called the Introduction to Corrections that I really learned that I wanted to be a probation officer. In that class, we had a book that had about 500 pages in it, and right smack dab in the middle of the book, there were about 2 or 3 pages that mentioned probation. And even though there wasn't a whole lot there on probation, I knew at that point, once I read it, I was hooked and wanted to be a probation officer. Unfortunately, when I graduated from college, there was a hiring freeze with the Florida Department of Corrections, so I couldn't get hired at the time. So I did the next best thing, and I applied for a position at the local sheriff's department as a correctional officer. I got hired as a correctional officer, and I must say that was quite the experience. And anybody that's a correctional officer, they are in a very tough field. I worked there for about 2 years. Then one day I finally got the call that I was waiting on, and that was I was hired as a correctional probation officer recruit with the Florida Department of Corrections. As I got hired, I went to the Correctional Probation Officer Academy, got out, became a correctional probation officer, and since that time, I've been promoted many times. I've held every certified position in the Florida Department of Corrections, and I've supervised every type of individuals on supervision. And about 4.5 years ago, I was promoted to my current position, which is the Assistant Secretary of Community Corrections.
I should also note that Joe Winkler and I are both members of the American Probation and Parole Association's International Relations Committee. And I encourage you to track down some of those hybrid episodes that we do when we partner with APPA, in particular, their International Relations Committee, to highlight some of our great international partners around the globe. Speaking of which, let's highlight one such episode in which I interviewed both Yana Sparrow and Juliana Carbonaro. They are both Europeans and both members of the Confederation of European Probation. Let me allow them to introduce yourselves as just a taste of this awesome episode.
Well, hello. Hi, Joe. It's so nice to be part of the podcast. So my name is Jana, as you said, Jana Spero, and I'm really proud to be part of this program. Well, as you said, now I am a Secretary General of the Confederation of European Probation, and I have to say that international cooperation is something that makes me super happy. So my job is actually a place where I feel like a fish in the water. And to go back to my personal history, a little bit about me. Well, don't run away, because I'm a lawyer from my education, and I started my career in the Ministry of Justice of the Republic of Croatia, where I worked for 17 years, first in international cooperation, and then I had a privilege to be one of the people who were building up and developing the probation service in Croatia. It's a young service that we started in 2010, opening offices in 2011, and it was really an excellent role to be there to set up what is now a really good modern professional service. But then after a few years, I got the opportunity to also become in charge for the prisons in the Republic of Croatia, and I became the first ever female Director General for prisons and probation in Croatia, which is a very nice role, but it's also very challenging role to have such a big system to be leader. I enjoyed every moment of the 5 years of being Director General, but then I decided that it was time to go on international level. So last year in September, I joined the CEP professionally as a Secretary General. And for me, this is now a really good role, because in my history, I was expert for the Council of Europe and for European Union, and I worked a lot on the different international projects. And also CEP, well, I can say, just like Juliana, that when it comes to CEP, we are the usual suspect, because we have a long history. Well, for me, I was 3 years board member of CEP, and I was 3 years vice president of CEP before I became the Secretary General. So it's in my blood, it's in my veins, and I will stop now and give a word to my dear Vice President, Juliana.
Thank you, Jana, and thank you, Joe, for having me actually for the second time in our show, the Criminologist show. It's a pleasure to discuss with you last year, and it's always a pleasure to be back. But for those of you who are listening for the first time, the Criminologist series, just to let you know that, similar like Jana, I have probation in my blood and in my veins. As I did that here in my country, Romania, since probably 20 years, more than 20 years, since probation was just an idea on a paper here in our country. As an education, I'm different comparing to Jana. I have a background in social work, and currently I'm doing my doctoral studies. I'm following a PhD here with the Bucharest University. And actually, I'm analyzing how ideas about probation are flying from one country to another. So I hope that soon we will be able to share with you these ideas for my research. But in my CEP capacity, again, I guess I'm celebrating this year around 20 years of CEP. 20. So why I am saying that is the fact that our organization from Romania, joined a CEP organization since many years ago. And I had the privilege and the honor to serve CEP and to represent my country as a board member. And starting with the last year in beautiful city of Dubrovnik, all our members gave me the honor and voted for me as a vice president for this term. So, this is, let's say, just a snapshot about our experience and career. But we are international suspects, as Jana said earlier.
Juliana, I'm looking forward to seeing you in The Hague this spring when we are both attending and presenting at the 6th World Congress on Probation and Parole. Jana, I suspect I will see you there as well. Okay, next up, we are going to hear from the vivacious Brittany Jackson, a.k.a. your favorite PO. Brittany is the co-host of another podcast entitled The Two Hats Podcast. Brittany is also a social media influencer. She has an amazing Instagram feed, a YouTube channel entitled Your Favorite PO. If any of you follow the Criminologist on Instagram or LinkedIn or social media, you may have seen me and Brittany and Dr. Ventura, who we previously heard from. We all got together in New York City for the APPA conference and really leveraged our various social media connections to promote the great work of the American Probation and Parole Association. Here's Brittany talking a little bit about the great work she does, trying to change the messaging around what probation and parole is all about.
Oh my gosh, I'm so glad you asked me that question, Joe. On my Instagram, I post a lot of stuff about probation, but I also post personal things. And I really want to separate the two. I've struggled with that for quite some time, actually. I started posting regularly on Instagram probably about 3 years ago, when I separated from my employer. I started doing it regularly, and I love the community engagement. I am a 2-time breast cancer survivor, and I post stuff about that as well. And I've connected with a lot of survivors and people going through that process, which has been a blessing to me because I feel like it's a blessing to be a blessing. They helped me get through the second cancer journey for sure. I documented the entire thing on my YouTube channel as well. I was filming me in the hospital, filming me going to chemotherapy, like all the things, telling them how I was feeling in the moment, just because I know that there's so many women that go through that. And when I first was diagnosed, I actively searched Instagram, Facebook, online forums to see, where are the survivors at. So to this day, I still keep up with what I call my pink sisters, and I let them know how I'm doing. And through my Instagram, you can see you can live a full life, a fulfilled life after you get to chemotherapy. And having breast cancer is not necessarily a death sentence, because when you first hear that, when the doctor tells you, hey, you have cancer, the first thing that comes to their mind is like mortality. And it's a hard thing to do. It's a hard thing to face. So I'm grateful for my pink sisters, and I'm grateful for a platform like Instagram and YouTube to share that and connect with other people who've been through that.
I encourage all of you to track down Brittany Jackson, also known as Your Favorite PO, on her various social media feeds. As we wrap up today's special Year in Review episode of the Criminologist podcast, I want to extend a heartfelt thank you to all of our listeners for joining us on this journey through the year. We have revisited some of the most enlightening and thought-provoking moments from our past episodes, reflecting on the diverse range of topics and insightful contributions from our esteemed guest. But our retrospective journey doesn't end here. We have had the privilege of hosting many more remarkable guests throughout this past year, whose insights and stories are equally compelling and deserving of reflection. So, I am excited to announce that next week we will continue our year in review with another special episode. We will delve into more highlights and discussions from the rest of our 2023 guests, ensuring that the insights and perspectives that they've shared are recognized and celebrated. This upcoming episode promises to bring more engaging conversations, more innovative ideas, and more inspiring stories from the world of criminal justice and probation. It's an episode you won't want to miss as we continue to explore the depths and complexities of our field. Until then, I encourage you to revisit some of our past episodes, reflect on the discussions we've had, and maybe even share your favorite moments with us. Your engagement and feedback are what make this podcast a vibrant and dynamic space for learning and discussion. Thank you once again for tuning in to the Criminologist podcast. Stay curious, stay informed, and continue to be part of these crucial conversations. We'll see you next week for another enriching look back at the year that was. Until then, take care and keep pushing the boundaries of understanding and reform in the world of criminal justice. If you have questions or comments as to this podcast, feel free to contact the show via our email at thecriminologistpodcast@gmail.com. That's thecriminologistpodcast@gmail.com. Remember to follow us through our Facebook and Instagram pages at The Criminologist Podcast. New fun images are being added all the time to those feeds. You don't want to miss out. The Criminologist Media Group is also on Twitter. Give us a follow at Crim Media Group. That's CRIM Media Group. You may also connect with me, Joseph Arvidson, on LinkedIn, and follow both the Criminologist Podcast and the Paragon Group on our LinkedIn pages. Hey, lastly, if you've not already done so, check out and subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Criminologist, for additional content as to the themes of this podcast. And if you believe in what we're doing on the show, if you're part of the movement, please spread the word. Tell a friend or a coworker or a colleague about us. Ask them to subscribe to the podcast, and of course, do so yourself if you've not already done so. And always remember, folks, there's no them, there's only us.
The Criminologist Podcast is a production of the Paragon Group, LLC. For speaking engagements, interviews, program design, or training opportunities, please visit us at theparagongroup.llc.com. If you enjoyed the show, you can find more content and videos on our YouTube channel, The Criminologist. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Both the Criminologist Podcast and the Criminologist channel are brought to you by the Criminologist Media Group. Be sure to give us a 5-star review, and thanks for listening.